A warm welcome to the Renewal Nuggets on YouTube. I'm Dr. Ioana Popa from Team for the Soul. And the question is, how do we know that I have a soul? And how do we understand from different perspectives other people's experiences of the soul? And what does that mean? So today I'm going to bring a very interesting perspective that has to do with this idea that our soul, we are meant to be born and live for eternity. So with that, let's dive in. Some of you might know or not, but I just finished my Master in Theological Studies at Holy Cross in Brookline after many years. I did it part-time. And one of my favorite courses, and came out very surprising to me, to my part of my brain, was dogmatics. Most people, when they think about a dogma, including myself, you're like, okay, what are the rules? Rules A, rule B, rule C, you got to stay. And especially when we associate dogmatics to church, many people think about very inflexible rules that can get people into trouble sometimes. They can be very helpful, but also can get us into trouble when they're very strict, fixed rules. But what I got out of this course was so surprising. So this is a course in dogmatics and Orthodox Christian theology. If you're not familiar with Orthodox theology, it goes all the way back to Christ. And what happened is, in the cradle of the early Christians, they really integrated Christ's life, but also the Greek thinking and philosophy, which in the West was lost and kind of regained in, I think, was the 16th century, or don't quote me on this, but in the East, in the Eastern Christian tradition, it was never lost and actually was metabolized and integrated from the beginning, because the main idea of the Orthodox theology, which my professor shared and was really struck me as so important, is Orthodox theology has to do with the thinking and relationship with God that resonates with the early Christians all the way through all the centuries. That's a big one. And in the same time, it integrates the current thought, for us is 21st century, and without compromising the freedom of thought. And what was this class about? Dogmatics was about the nature of God. There's a Trinity, which is this mystery. And there's always the tensions between things that seem so opposite to one another. And in the same time, there is a third way, a third logic that holds them together. So it has to do with the nature of God and the nature of us as human beings, being this hinge between the spiritual world and the material world. And what I love in the Orthodox theology is this idea that we are born one time. There's not reincarnation. Some other faiths believe that, but there is a joint venture, so to speak, between our soul and our body, right from the beginning, from when we were born, from the inception, and then we develop through, but we are really meant for eternity. And that, to me, is a crucial message that we want to ponder about. What if this is true? I mean, obviously, you might have hearing this, you might believe something totally different. And I'm not here to challenge or get into a debate about it. I'm a scientist, so I love to think from many perspectives. And fundamentally, for me, the question is, how do we actually know about it? You might remember me saying science was born actually from Christian thinking, because they really felt there was some order in this universe that came from God. And how do we actually know the will of God? And this is where scientific methodology was born at. We got to test things. We want to test things in a certain way to know that it's true. So if we are really meant for eternity, this is the actual question that we're holding. And we might or might not have the answer in the lifetime. But underneath that, the question is, what would that mean if that is the case? So from a Christian perspective, the soul does exist. We are given that from God right from the inception, and there's a sense of growth and development. We don't stop growing. We are given the fruits of the Spirit. You might have heard this verse from Galatians. The fruits of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And the idea is that we are born in the image of God, but we're moving through our life towards the likeness of God. So we can use our will and our faculties, our actions, our behaviors to shape and move more and more towards the oneness with God, towards eternal life. And I'm not here to challenge this sense. Is this true? Is this not true? Because then what we do, we actually move into our mind, move on a thought level, and then is my thought against your thought against someone else's thought. And that never goes well. We know from psychology that mindsets, there's no way to prove them. They just exist, and we believe them is the truth. So going just circular into our minds and fighting about, is this truth correct or not, is not necessarily going to be fruitful. But what I found really fruitful are two things. One, to really encourage all of us to ask the question, if I do have a soul, and if it is eternal, don't I want to know it? And you heard me this in another YouTube. Don't I want to know it in my lifetime? And number two, since in psychology it's shown that thoughts and beliefs, they feel like the truth, but they're not the truth. In other words, I might think that I'm really bad. I might have this self-critical voice in my head. You're really bad. You're undeserving of love or whatever. Just because I have a repetitive thought in my brain, it doesn't make it a reality. But many times as human beings, we live with this idea that if we have particular thoughts that are unchallenged or they're full of emotions, we take them as reality. So we know from psychological research that we can change our mindset. There's an entire psychological branch that works in that and has psychological methodologies. It's called cognitive psychology, which helps people examine their own beliefs and really think through them. Are they really true? Are they real? And how do we know? And are they really beneficial? Now, some questions we might not be able to answer, like, is my soul eternal or not? Like, well, if it isn't, I guess I'm not going to find out, because when I die, I guess I'm just dead. But if it is, then I won't know. But after the fact, it's going to be really important that right now I take that into consideration, right? The question is going to become, which mindset and which beliefs am I choosing to believe that are going to be the most beneficial for me and for the future in my ultimate reality, if there is an ultimate reality, right? And as I said before, if there's no ultimate reality, if we really go into nothingness, then it doesn't really matter anyway. So that is not important in my part of the equation and in my mindsets, because it's not going to have any impact. But if I do live for eternity and there is a soul, like Christian tradition shares and the mystics through their experiences, then that might be something that I do want to take in consideration. And I do want to research it more. And I do want to find out. So primary theology has to do with our own experience of God. Secondary, as we learn from someone else. So the question becomes, okay, people are not going to agree. God exists, God doesn't exist. Is soul eternal? Is not a soul eternal? Great. But how are you going to know? How am I going to know? Because guess what? God forgot to text us. We don't receive messages from God telling us, oh, you got to do this or not. He actually loves us so much that he empties himself from, this is one of the theological principles. He emptied himself and allows us to fully be embodied and discover our own free will and discover our sense of freedom. So since our thoughts and beliefs are changeable based on our experience, and psychological research is showing that, then we can have the ultimate freedom to choose our beliefs and the stories we tell to ourselves, which will have the biggest impact, fast forward throughout our existence, all the way to meeting our ultimate reality. So with that, I hope I give you food for thought. Maybe I twisted your brain altogether and I want to replay this really slowly. But with that, I want to send lots of appreciation for who you are and for your beliefs and this way our mind works, which is quite amazing, and just realize the power that we actually have internally to pick and choose our beliefs. Many times we think we're very independent in our thinking, but we are so changed by our culture, by our online, by things that we see on social media, and we don't even know about it. And it's proven now in psychological sciences that that happens all the time, that we do shortcuts, that we take things for granted. We have mindsets that are so repetitive that we're not even aware. There's a fancy term for this, heuristics. The rule of thumbs, our brain does that automatically. So it's refreshing to know that we can, the deepest freedom that we have is that we can pause and examine our beliefs, not so much from who's right, who's wrong, am I right, am I wrong, but more like I'm one existence in this world, and there are many others in this world. How do we know? How do I know? And how do we collectively know? And how do I make choices that will impact us in positive ways, fast forward towards our ultimate reality? So, with that, I thank you for all you do in this world, and I say goodbye for now.